Reflection by Malvoish. Peter wants to show Nebula how beautiful she is. His ways are just a bit unconventional. Chapter 1. You can't be serious. Oh, come on, Nebs. I tell you this will be fun. Don't you trust me? Nebula should have known that Peter was up to something. The entire day he had acted strange. As in, when Cosmo dragged in the biggest Orloni in existence and expected to get praised type of strange. And it was something that made Nebula worry, and slightly curious, the entire day. Fortunately, Peter's surprise wasn't a 3-foot-long Orloni spiked on adrenaline after being catched by a talking dog in a spacesuit, running laps through their kitchen, destroying everything on its way. No. Peter's surprise was his 4-foot-high mirror placed right in front of his bed, from which Nebula right now watched herself considering her life choices that led her to have fallen in love with Peter Jason Quill. As if it was really her choice to lose her heart to him in the first place. How will this be fun? As answer, Peter pouted and gave her the most intense puppy look Nebula had seen to date. I want to show you how beautiful you are. Something tells me you do not quite believe me yet. Nebula looked at herself for a few seconds in the mirror, her dark eyes staring right back at her, not showing any emotions. At last, not how her old pair used to. Not that she had much memory of those, but they probably showed more emotion than this bottomless black. Her guts felt like they were twisting together into a lumpy mess, and she broke the look at her own self. No, she didn't believe she was beautiful. Quite the opposite. And she still didn't understand what Peter saw in her to address her as such. In comparison to other Lufamoids, in comparison to her natural intended appearance, her current state of body was hideous. There wasn't a day a look in the mirror didn't woke in her the desire to know how she would have looked like if it wasn't for Thanos and his sick torture. It's not easy to believe you are beautiful when you look like this. Peter noticed the sadness in her voice. It broke his heart to see Nebula lose confidence when it was about her appearance. For him, she was beautiful. Her beautiful blue and purple skin, her soft features despite her resting face. He loved the small dimples in her cheeks when she laughed at one of his stupid jokes. And he loved her deep dark eyes who reminded him of the endless universe he fell in love with as a child. Every time he found himself staring at her, getting lost in their deepness, throwing him back into a feeling of nostalgia. And that is what he wanted to show her. Her beauty, in one of her most beautiful stages, he was blessed enough to learn about her just recently. Sexual pleasure. Oh, her skin glistened in sweet sweat. Taint blue cheeks that just begged to be kissed. Her beautiful eyes that seemed to shine in pure after bliss. Ajar lips, swollen from kisses, filling the air with her soft whimpers and sighs as her orgasm calmed down her burning body. The soft trembling of her legs she always seemed to try to hide. Once Nebula sees herself in such a natural state, she must start to see her beauty. At last starting to, because God knows why she didn't just trust his words. So he had this idea about using the mirror. Okay, first he thought about recording her, but something told him Nebula wouldn't be that fond on filming a sex tape this early in their relationship, if ever even. And something about using a mirror felt much more classy. Peter bent down to place a small kiss on his girlfriend's lips, who, despite him standing close to her, wasn't prepared for that sudden kiss. So all she did was sit there, mouth slightly opened, and her eyes big in surprise. Let's just try it, okay? We will stop whenever you want, but please, give it a shot first. A few moments passed where the two lovers watched each other's faces. Peter's big green eyes looked into Nebula's dark ones, and her heart skipped several beats. He knew exactly what he was doing with those puppy eyes of his. Manipulative. Okay, but once I feel just any type of discomfort, we stop. Peter gave her a reassuring nod. We will stop, and you can be mad at me all night. And tell me, told you so, as long as you think I deserve it." Nebula chuckled at his ridiculous offer and decided to, for once, initial something. Usually she still was too unsure when it was an appropriate time. She even still struggled with something so simple as to hold his hand, but Peter was nothing but patient with her. It was almost as if he was able to read her intentions, her mind, whenever she thought about showing any kind of affection. A surprised sound left Peter's mouth when Nebula suddenly grabbed his collar and dragged him along while she leaned into the soft mattress underneath, making him knee on top of her. "Didn't expect you to get all in out of the sudden, though we may talk for a bit. Not that I mind." Nebula scoffed in response. "Of course you don't mind, you horn dog." Peter smirked and whispered a silent guilty as he laid his lips on Nebula's, green eyes so soft and cloudy as they closed, leaving warm shivers on Nebula's skin. She leaned her head slightly to the side to give them both more space, which Peter used on the spot, deepening their kiss, sneaking his tongue between her purple lips, tasting his lover's mouth. Faded minty toothpaste paired with that bitterness of her unsweetened tea. Peter giggled as he tasted a bit of chocolate, the chocolate that suddenly disappeared from his counter. She claimed she didn't touch, didn't even lay her eyes on. Peter made a mental note to tease her about it later. No, Nebula still was insecure in kissing, her mind still trying to find a pattern she was supposed to follow. But Peter made it hard to analyze, since he followed his heart instead of a step-by-step guide. So all she did was mimic Peter's actions, just in a more awkward way. Her lover didn't seem to mind, as he loved to teach her things. 2 hands cupped Peter's face, one warm and one slightly cold one. Pulling him more up, he kindly followed, positioning himself in a hovering position that gave him access to sneak his impatient hand under the beige shirt. Their lips not breaking apart gave Peter an instant response in the form of a surprised, muffled sound into his mouth. Once his hand caressed Nebula's stomach, he felt her breathing and heartbeat stepping rapidly up. Even after all these times they had touched each other in the last months, it was still surprising how sensitive his partner's body was with simple touches. Him randomly grabbing her hand made her blush to the ears, and pulling her into hugs speeded up her heartbeat. Nebula's innocence in this area was just so indulging for Peter. His selfish part hoped it would never change. So, with ease, he rolled up her shirt until it exposed her bare chest. Sitting up, he pulled Nebula in a sitting position. It made undressing much easier, and as much he loved taking his sweet time, bringing his lover on edge, today he was the impatient one. "So how will this work?" Peter stopped in his tracks. His eyes wandered up to Nebula's face. Her features looked worried and insecure as she eyed herself in the mirror. Peter's heart ached at her hurt glance. "First we get that pants off you." He may or may not have acted clumsy while unbuckling Nebula's belt, fidgeting with it as if it was his first time. Nebula's frustrated groan as she smacked his hands off and unbuckled it herself was exactly what he wanted to achieve. "Okay, they're off. What now?" The woman's voice was soaking in impatience with a hint of curiosity. Heavy breathing sped up as she felt the air on her bare skin, making her feel underdressed, while her lover was still fully covered in clothes, observing every inch of her exposed body. She winced when his big, calloused hands found their way on her stomach, stroking softly up and down, sending electric-like pulses through her limbs. A firm grip on her waist kept her from slipping away as Nebula threw her head back and melted even more into the soft surface. Wet lips leaving a trail of kisses on her neck wandering down, nibbling on her skin, and even kissing her metallic parts. Nebula didn't even know anymore where Peter was having his lips on her. Every limb, every muscle, every damn fiber in her body was tingling, sending all the same message to her fogging mind. Arousal. She suddenly felt 2 strong hands grabbing her thighs and pulling them apart. Peter gently pulled her closer to the edge of the bed as he kneed in front of it, her legs dangling down as his arms hooked under each of them, holding them in place. All senses started to focus on the kisses that continued down her abdomen. Her heartbeat raced the further Peter's lips wandered, his teeth playful, nibbling at her thigh skin, sucking at several places, leaving marks. All the sensitive spots she didn't even know existed. She whimpered at the feeling so near her sex, feeling lust, a need she so far couldn't communicate, probably didn't even need since it was so clear, right in front of her lover's face. "God, you're so wet already," she heard him say, his voice so raspy, dripping like honey in her ears, a voice that was only reserved for their private hours, making it special to her, desire in every word. His fingers on her folds, feeling the soft skin combined with her clear juice, giving off the sweet scent of arousal that made him lick his lips. "Let me eat you, beautiful." Confused by his request, her eyes fluttered open. Her view was blurry at first, cloudy even. When her eyes wandered down to look at her lover between her legs, she took a short glimpse at herself in the mirror. Laying on the bed, spread wide open, nude, fully exposed to everyone who would happen to walk into Peter's room. Anxious, she thought about telling him to check the door again, but dismissed it again, not wanting to miss him between her legs even for a second. Her out-of-place thoughts were washed away by a sudden flick on her clit, not intense enough to beckon a vocal reaction out of her, but enough to make her leg twitch. Automatic, it wiggled a bit in Peter's hold. The man chuckled at the adorable reaction. Nebula's eyes now searching for Peter's, she found him staring right at her, as if he had waited for their eyes to meet. His pupils were so big they almost covered his intense green irises. This look was so entrancing to her, she nodded in response to his former request. Still staring in each other's eyes, Nebula thought to have seen his pupils growing even more. Peter didn't break the eye contact when he started to lick Nebula's delicate clit. He needed to see her reaction. Flicking his tongue, circling, sucking. Everything made his lover's body react even harder, but their eyes were still locked. It was like a fight they silently had, figuring out who would give up at first. The room filled with Nebula's heated sounds, agitated moans combined with profound whimpers. A melody Peter had grown an obsession with the moment it blessed his ears for the first time. The usual already deep voice echoing from deep inside her body, it seems, sending not only herself deep shivers through her being, but her partner as well. With one last glance, Peter caved before he closed his eyes. Shifting his head, he covered the entire quivering labia with his lips, parting them with his tongue and dipping in. Delicious heat covering his muscle, sliding in so smoothly due to his lover's already overflowing juice, a mix of sweet and bitter on his lips and tongue. Peter moaning in his own arousal, sending deep vibrations inside Nebula's sensitive sex, the woman's hand grabbing Peter's hair, blue fingers trembling intertwined with his strawberry blonde locks, pushing him deeper inside. Unbothered by the slight pain in his scalp, he continued his pleasuring. The hot, wet walls pulsing around his tongue, signaling him that she was close. He placed a few last licks over her entire sex, flicking her clit. Nebula felt her entire body explode under her lover's ridiculously skilled tongue. Losing control over her motions, her long, slender legs started to tremble, stretching out, kicking in sheer pleasure. Only stopping her from slipping away were Peter's strong arms and equally strong hands, supporting her now raised bottom, keeping it in one place. And, back arching, her mouth opened wide, a delayed throaty groan followed by desperate whimpering. Her bottom twitched as if several electric jolts were pulsing through her, and knowing her anatomy, maybe it was exactly that, grinding her sex over her lover's lips and nose in the process. She couldn't hear but feel Peter groaning in excitement into her regions, the last sensation needed to make her see stars. Her body flushing with all types of stimulation, she finally came with a high moan of his name, and one last tuck on sweaty hair. Her thighs tucked around Peter's head, calves crossed behind. She hadn't even noticed that Peter's hands had lost their grip on her, allowing her to hold herself up on her own. Shivering. The first moments after her climax, Nebula felt her legs getting weak, quivering, losing their tight grip around Peter and falling back over the edge of bed. Heartbeats so fast she felt like dying. Licking his lips, Peter watched Nebula riding out her orgasm. Her chest rising so heavy, he thought he even could see her heart beating under the metallic part that was covering half her chest. She looked delicate, as if every touch was too much for her, and Peter felt this pride inside of him to be responsible for her pleasure, that he was allowed to see her in such a state, her guard down, vulnerable. Plopping himself down on the bed, he took the time to think over his further actions. To be fair, he hadn't expected Nebula coming so hard that she seemed to be out of it this long. There were several things he had planned for tonight, but looking at his lover's already messy state, he may need to ask for anything further. The last thing he wanted was for Nebula to overheat any of her robotic parts. He hated to think about it, but he was not willing to be responsible for her memory to overheat and turn off. Listening to Nebula's slowly calming breathing and the soft tunes of Do It Again by Steely Dan, he looked at the ceiling, waiting for the perfect moment to finally start talking. He usually was no stranger to unprompted talking, but he felt like giving Nebula the peace to recover. When he felt her shift and groaned in a bit of embarrassment in her tone, "I can't believe you did that to me, that I let you do this to me. Told you it was about to be fun." He felt the mattress move as Nebula sat up. He propped himself up on his forearms and watched her grabbing a pillow and hugging it against her chest. Scoping over to sit next to her, he suddenly felt the effect his actions had on his body, his erection pressing against the inside of his pants. Ignoring it as much as he could, he sat next to her, trying to find a comfortable position. Clearing his throat, he turned his head to her to ask if she was up for another round, in hope to get rid of his boner, but he stopped himself when he watched Nebula staring at herself in the mirror. The pillow that had covered her body now rested beside her. Nebula watched her reflection closely, her skin shimmering in a layer of sweat, dark blue marks, Peter's marks, trailing down on her body, a lasting reminder of the man's lips. Careful, she traced the way down like a treasure map until she reached her lower waist. Frowning. "Is that why you placed that thing here? So I can look at your fresh markings?" "Well, not only for that," he started. He didn't expect to need to explain it to her, just that it would play out like he planned it. "Also, those are love bites. No markings." She hummed nonchalantly, still looking at her love bites, while wondering what exactly Peter wanted to use the mirror for, if not to show her his attack on her body. Taking a glimpse at his reflection, he looked tense, kind of restless, not like someone who just had his plan carried out perfectly. Curiosity hit her again. "Then why don't you show me? And why didn't you do it from the start?" Nervous Peter bit his lip. "I got carried away with eating you out. I really dug in. I mean, you're fucking delicious, okay?" Normally, Peter loved to think back about his sexual actions, but right now it was torture. Thinking back just made his dick harder, more sensitive, and just more closer to stain the inside of his pants. And the last thing he wanted was to come in his pants like some horny teenager, even if he felt like one at the moment. And showing it to you would require me to touch you, but I don't know if you are up to that again. There was a moment of silence between them. "I mean, I would make you I know what you mean." Nebula shifted in her seat and grabbed the pillow again, pressing it hard against her chest. Peter took this as an obvious no. He wasn't mad. Not everyone could go multiple rounds. He slightly wiggled out of his position, about to stand up when he was stopped by a metallic hand grabbing his wrist, pulling him back. Peter let out a startling noise, his eyes fixated on Nebula's face that popped up in his view, as the woman leaned over him. Her expression hard to decipher. Only the dark blue cheeks that dyed her ears gave him a hint. Then show me. Chapter 2. It took Nebula a lot of confidence to take this huge of an initiative, and if her mind wouldn't be full of internally cluttered thoughts, she would feel proud of herself. But her mind was running at high speed, not letting any clear thoughts through. Just her right now, leaning over Peter, who looked at her puzzled with his hand pinned above his head. All staring at each other, one of them overwhelmed by her own actions, and the other piling up the pride he felt for her. And eventually not staining his pants, because damn, if he didn't like his girlfriend's sudden boost of confidence. But a look at Nebula's face told him she may had overdid it a bit. Her face was at last 2 shades darker, and as much he loved getting pinned down by her, something he should bring up again at some point, her hold got a little too tight. Clearing his throat, he grabbed her metallic wrist with his free hand, just to signalize her that it was fine to let him lose. But please let me take off my clothes first. Nebula almost jumped up, giving Peter space to sit up, rolling his shoulders. His hands were about to grab the hem of his shirt when a blue and a metallic hand grabbed it before him, rolling it slightly up. Without protesting, he let Nebula pull his shirt above his head. So, his eyes found hers, shy looking up at him. Let me do that for you. Nebula's hands wandered over his hips, just soft butterfly-like touches, when she saw Peter nodding in response. His warm smile made her heart skip, and before her mind could even respond, she had laid her lips on his, soft and short. Of all the kisses they shared, this kind was her favorite, and she felt confident in them. Lips to lips, she felt Peter sigh in relief when her hands undid his pants. Peter helped her with wiggling himself out of his jeans, short groaning in his lover's open mouth before throwing his head back. Geez, that was overdue. She watched Peter shift his position, and her eyes catched a glimpse at his erection, covered in a thin layer of fabric, but its form clearly recognizable. There was a warm feeling crawling in her guts. She couldn't pinpoint what it was. It wasn't the type of warmth she felt when she was aroused. It was something else. It felt like when she first realized she had feelings for Peter. Warm and fuzzy, curious with a hint of anxiety. That's not important right now. Peter's voice broke her fuzzy, unclear thoughts. Nebula noticed that she was still staring at Peter's crotch. His hand laid on her chin and moved it to look at her. Instead of saying anything, he just stared at her, just like back then when he complimented her eyes the first time. Nebula swallowed the lump that was forming in her throat, took his hand and started to play with his fingers. Just to do anything, glossing over her nervosity. So how will this go? What do I need to do? Peter blinked as if he was waking up from a trance. He got lost again in her eyes. Mentally, he slapped himself. Focus, Starlord. He grabbed the pillow from Nebula's lap, ignoring her protest, and placed it at the wall on his bed. All you need to do now is lean back. Right here. Just get all comfortable. Nebula frowned but did as she was told. With crossed legs, she leaned back in the warm pillow, sighed deep, mentally preparing herself. She didn't know what to expect. Her knowledge in that field was just not expanded enough to even fathom what Peter had planned. What we will do is I will show you at your body what I find beautiful, and you will watch it. Real time. Peter moved the mirror a bit so Nebula saw herself right in the center before plumbing back on the mattress and settled down next to her. Most important, tell me when you're uncomfortable. I'm not pressuring you into anything, all right? If you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. No biggie. Wiggling in his seat, Peter got into a comfortable position himself, watching Nebula closely for any uncomfortable signs, but all she did was look nervous. He could work with that. Nebula watched Peter's hand move to her face, touching her chin. Just a soft touch before drawing along her cheeks. His fingers left a trail of tingling under her skin. "Seed, I like your face. You look tough but feminine. How can you not get drawn in? I always hear you say you have problems showing emotions, but you don't realize how many expressions you are actually showing. Those lips of yours look beautiful when you smile, or when you yell at me. In both cases, you look kissable." Peter's finger drew along her lips, just short before giving her nose a little tap with a vocal added boop. She gave him an eyebrow-raised look before smiling softly. In an instant, 2 hands cupped her face and placed a kiss on her lips. Short but sloppy. Exactly like that. Look how cute that smile is. Still holding her face, they looked into each other's eyes, stroking small circles on her cheekbones with his thumbs. Nebula only had a few moments to look at Peter before he moved her head back to look in the mirror. But those short moments were enough to see that he was probably just as nervous as she was. This here was something he hadn't done often, if ever even. It lifted a lot of tension from her. "I wasn't lying back then. Your eyes are pretty. You know, when I was still a child on Earth, I used to stay up late, just staring at the night sky. My mother used to tell me my father was going to come, and that he was from the stars. So I spend some nights just staring at the sky, and it's not always on Earth like it's here. There are nights you look up and see just pitch darkness except the moon, and that one star you mistook for a shooting star you then find out was actually an airplane." Usually she would tell him to stop rambling, but something in the tone of Peter's voice made her stay silent. Just listen to him. Maybe it was because he talked about his childhood, the ones before he got abducted, before his mother died. He liked to talk about his life, but he still was sort of reserved on that part of his past. It felt special right now. Your eyes, they remind me of those nights. I get this melancholic nostalgia from them. Also, when you look long enough just in their center, you get these illusions with little sparks. It looks like the universe. It's beautiful." Nebula didn't know what to think about Peter making himself hallucinate sparking dots after staring too long in her eyes, but it sounded like a habit he won't give up. Not even for her. Peter's hands wandered from her chin to her neck, right under her left ear. A reflex winch went through Nebula's body. She shivered under the touch. "You might be a lot of steel and metal, but your skin is so sensitive. I just need to get your special places I totally didn't study or anything, and keep hidden in my brain, and you melt in my hands. Like here." Peter touched her neck again, gaining the exact same reaction. "Or here." Repeating it at several other places on her body. The inside of her elbow on her right arm, the palm of her right hand, her stomach, hips. He didn't seem to stop, just enjoying that winching woman in his arms. Some places even tickled Nebula so sudden it made her giggle. Soft. Almost a whisper. Even if Peter said before she was melting under his touch, it was him now feeling like butter listening to her soft giggles. Placing a kiss on her head, he stopped his touching for the moment, but kept his hands in their last position. Looking at her through the mirror felt different. Not bad, just different. Nebula looked right back at him. Peter bit his lips, considering if he should bring up the next part, how to bring it up. But it was something that needed to be said. This will be controversial with us now, but listen, first of all, fuck that purple asshole. What he did to you. Nebula had placed her fingers on his lips, stopping him from talking. Pleading look at her face. Uncomfortable. Peter could feel her body tensing up to just thinking about him, and he could kick his own ass for that. She just had softened up, and he blasted it. Sorry. An apologizing kiss was put on Nebula's eyebrow. It's just, listen, I know how your body image is messing with you, but all this? Gesturing over her body, he watched her closely, in case he may be overstepping a boundary again. Nothing came in response, so he continued. This is you, and it's beautiful. Every piece of your body, it's you. Do I wish it never happened to you? Absolutely. Do I still find you gorgeous? You betcha. Your cyborgness is just as much you as you being a luphamoid. It kinda icks me when you say what's left of me. Because it's not true. Physically, yeah, but mentally. Your soul, your character, it's all fully here. This is you. All that steel doesn't make you less of a person. It is part of you. And I love every bit of it. His fingers had intertwined with her prosthetic ones, kissing every single one, slowly moving up with his kisses, taking in every centimeter. Once he reached her shoulder, he reminded his lips there, and took a quick look at Nebula. She looked like she was about to cry. Her eyes swelling up with tears, she fought back. She couldn't feel his touch, but why was she feeling it when she watched him kiss them in their reflection? Close your eyes for a sec. The moment they closed, Peter placed 2 kisses on her eyelids. Just a quick touch on his journals of many more. Once Nebula opened her eyes, Peter had moved on again, now kissing his way up to her memory piece. There was no way of holding in her tears. She made a sound of choking on her tears before they flowed over her cheeks. Stop, please. No protest, just lips vanishing off her body, leaving an empty feeling she replaced with pulling him in her arms, hugging him tight, burying her head in his shoulder. Peter's arms wrapped around her, stroking her head, holding her. I love you, Nebula. Not just your flesh or your blood. I love your steel, your electronics, your prosthetics, your everything. Nebula's hands cupped his face and she kissed him, basically falling into his arms, almost knocking him over. They fell into a kiss, wrapped around each other. It felt like they melted together. Their kiss was passionate, intense, but no lust, only love. Parting their lips, they looked at each other. Peter placed a last kiss on her nose before leaning his forehead against her. I love when you walk in here in the morning because you let me sleep in. I know you let me sleep in because I wake up from the way your kiss on my cheek seemed to be the first thing you do. I love how you know how I like my coffee. I love how your eyes light up when the kids call you Big Sister. I love how you laugh about my jokes. Nebula stopped his rambling about all the things he loved about her with another kiss. This man for sure was about to kill her if he kept going. Stop. God, Peter, do you want me to die here? Whipping off her last tears, she looked at his grinning face. No, but I wanted you to smile, and that's what I got. Leaning into him, she nudged his shoulder. Softly. They stayed like that, just holding each other. Peter had started to stroke her head again, feeling her relaxed breathing in his arms. Do you love yourself now a little better? She chuckled, looking up at him. Peter's heart was about to explode. We getting there, but until then I'm glad that you do. Chapter 3. Bonus. Being tangled up together, Peter and Nebula laid on the bed, Nebula's head on Peter's chest, her eyes closed, listening to his heartbeat. Steady and strong. Maybe a bit too strong. Peter, are you okay? Raising her head, she looked at his face. His cheeks dyed in soft pink. He cleared his throat, avoiding her eyes. Ziza. Yep. Because your heartbeat is really strong, and your face, you are really red. Cupping his face, she came closer to his face with her own. Do you have a Nebs, I'm still fucking horny. He didn't meant to spit it out like that, but having a hard-on after eating out your girlfriend you still hide in your underwear was painful, especially if your butt-naked girlfriend was using you as a pillow, pressing her delicious curves all over your body. And he would be a tiny bit mad at her if he didn't know that she wasn't teasing him on purpose. Watching Nebula just looking at him, first his face, and then down between his legs. Her hand laid on his chest, sliding down, stopping at his stomach. He couldn't see her face, but he knew she was thinking. Peter felt his erection twitch in his underwear. She was a tease without knowing it. At last, that is what he was hoping. Finally looking back at him, he felt his stomach drop. big dark eyes looking right at him. Can I take care of you then? Feeling the soft fuzz that grew on his chest and running down his stomach, giving her a mix of different textures. Skin, muscles, soft hair, his heartbeat that seemed to take over his entire upper body. She barely had experience, only the few times she had slept. And if it counted the videos she watched for research purposes, with Peter himself, and most of the time he was the one being the active part. It made her nervous, but she wanted to give some pleasure back to him. He had done so much for her that night. It only seemed fair. Stopping at the waistband of his underwear, she looked up at him, greeted by his intense eyes staring in hers, and then at her hands. God, yes. Licking his lips, he watched her nervous, trembling hands pulling down his waistband and freeing his erection. A bit amused, he watched Nebula's eyes becoming big as she observed the twitching organ in front of her. They had slept with each other several times at this point, but Nebula hadn't seen his dick this close yet. Carefully wrapped Nebula her fingers around the organ, feeling it twitch in her hand, radiating a hotness she only so far had felt inside of herself. Finally holding the thing that had brought her so much pleasure, she didn't come around to look at it closer. Veins pulsing on its sides. Curious, she ran her thumb over them, causing it to twitch heavily in her hand, and Peter to whimper, but she gave him no attention. She was too focused to learn about this new experience in her hand. Prying, she let her finger wander over it. Soft touches on the sensitive, soft flesh. Barely any contact, but Peter seems to react to it. At every touch, his voice got louder. Whimpers, moans, attempted words that only consisted of a variety of her name, and mumbled expressions she couldn't decipher. Nebula felt his breathing getting more heavy, so she finally broke her intense eye contact on his member and let her eyes wander up Peter. He was propping himself up on his pillows, tense shoulders which trembled under his aroused body. A look at his face revealed barely opened, cloudy green eyes, looking at her almost begging. Mouth opened, letting deep respirations escape. Nebula wouldn't lie. She liked how Peter looked right now, and something told her this wasn't the last time she would have seen him like that. She got so enchanted by his look, she forgot for a second the throbbing organ in her hand, but Peter sure didn't. A loud, despaired whimper left his lips as he laid one hand on Nebula's, starting to move their hands up and down his erection, sighed deep before turning over into soft whimpers again. Nebula watched him closely. His half-lit eyes looked right at her. His hot breath struck her face. She couldn't fight the urge to kiss him softly on the lips. Peter took the opportunity and kissed her hard back. So they kissed while clumsy jacking Peter's dick together, her hands sticky with pre-cum around the throbbing organ, the slick noises, Peter's whimpers in between their lips touching. Nebula felt the arousal taking over her body again, the second time tonight. Unintentional, she moaned in his mouth, making him smile, breaking their kiss. She groaned in disappointment, but Peter only laid his forehead on hers, eyes closed, while heavy breathing and moaning. "I'm close." His voice was so hot on her face, so breathless and heavy. Watching his concentrated face, Nebula could no longer be silent. "Make love to me, yeah?" It was just a whisper that sounded more shy than intended, but it was enough for Peter to let out a higher moan, releasing his cum into their intertwined hands. The sensation of Peter coming in her hand was similar to the one when he came inside of her, hot and wet, pulsing. The throbbing was addictive. Looking at his face, all red and sweaty, radiating intense hotness, Nebula licked her lips. She hadn't noticed how dry her mouth had become. She swallowed a few times before kissing Peter again. Sloppy, with a bit too much spit and tongue, but they didn't mind. Wrapping their arms around another, they slowly fell back. Nebula could feel Peter's erection on her leg, still hard even after coming just earlier. It made her stomach tingle, knowing she was responsible for it. Breaking their kiss, her lips wandered down Peter's jaw, her hands buried in his strawberry locks, messing them even more up. Kissing down his neck, leaving this time her own love bites. Just two right under each other on. She grinned. She couldn't wait until Peter saw them. "Did you just give me hickeys?" Peter's voice was husky but cheerful. Nebula raised her head, their foreheads connecting, looking at each other. "Pretty sure they are called love bites." Shifting under Peter, she spread her legs. "You can look at them later. Now fuck me." Looking down at his girlfriend, her dark eyes so big and needy, her swollen lips, hot breath on his face, Peter licked his lips. That was perfect. Exactly like he wanted her to be. He pushed off her, ignoring her protests as he rolled on his back and pulled her along, making her sit across his chest. Pushing his head far back, he looked at their perfect positioned reflection. What the fuck, Peter? Covering herself with her arms at her suddenly so exposed body in front of her. "I thought we were over the mirror part." "That is part 2. Didn't plan it for right now, but the situation was perfect." Rolling her eyes, Nebula shifted her hips, trying to get a more comfortable position. "So what's the plan?" "You ride me and look at yourself while that..." Sudden silence except Peter's playlist playing in the background. Nebula looked at herself in the mirror. Covered in dark blue and purple spots, cheeks dyed in dark blue, her legs spread over Peter's chest. Oh, you can say no." Feeling Peter's hands on her hips, she looked down. Big green eyes looking up at her. Not that puppy look again. "Oh, how am I supposed to say no when you look at me like that? With your stupid green big dog eyes." Peter let out a fake gasp, which made her chuckle. Shifting again, this time back until she felt Peter's erection pushing on her butt. Hovering herself up, she placed her entrance right up it, pushing herself down. Covering her mouth with one hand, she moaned under the feeling of being full. No matter how many times they did it already, her body still wasn't used to it. Nebula had already suspected that something in her anatomy was responsible for it. Maybe Luphamoids and humans weren't that compatible in the sexual manner, although she loved Peter inside of her. And looking at his face, he felt the same. "You good up there?" he asked, massaging her hips. "Have I ever told you how fucking good you feel?" Slightly punching his chest, she smiled down at him. He was just trying to take the nervosity off her. She appreciated it. "Every time, Peter. Now let me do my thing." My thing, you mean?" "It's inside of me right now, so it's mine." Careful, she started moving her hips. She only had done it in this position once, so it still felt foreign. Peter's dick inside was still something she needed to get used to, especially so deep. But her body was adjusting fast, so they fell into a passionate rhythm, filling the room once again with melodic love-making sounds. Kwasiu. At first, Peter was still helping her move with his hands, holding her hips steady until he felt her being fine on her own, letting his hands wander over her body, tracing his own hickey trail up her breasts, cupping them. Her body shuddered under his touches, looking at her face, eyes closed, concentrated on her movements. "Don't forget to look at yourself." Slowly, she opened her eyes. Her blurred glance slowly faded and gave view on her body. Her eyes found her mirror parts, dark and deep, opened just to slits, wandering down her body, her skin shimmer in sweat. It felt embarrassing to see herself like this, but she couldn't break eye contact. Stemming her arms on Peter's thighs, she changed the rhythm, causing him to let out a whimper. Watching his dick sliding in and out from herself looked so surreal to her. This thick thing could never fit inside. But it did. Hit all her spots that made her see stars. As feeling her orgasm approach, she dug her fingers into Peter's flesh. Like she pushed a button, he sat up, wrapping his arms around her, hugging her tight. No space between their bodies. now moving her hips more hectic onto him, haphazardly moving her arms wrapped around his back, not knowing if to hold on to him. Her arms felt so out of place, and the sudden closeness pushed him so much deeper into her. It only took her a few more thrusts until her mind went blank, moaning into Peter's neck as he came inside of her, bucking hips meeting her rolling ones. Heavy breathing, riding out their orgasms, they remain in their position. Nebula placed kisses on Peter's neck and shoulder. The man giggled in response, still breathless. Out of curiosity, Nebula took a look at herself at them in the mirror. Seeing herself sweaty, wrapped around her boyfriend's visible breathing body, her cheeks still dark blue, and that wide, peaceful smile on her face she hadn't noticed before, feeling her heart hammering heavy in her chest. Seeing and feeling everything combined made her feel oddly alive. "Thank you for loving me, Peter." Feeling his arms tighten around her, she felt so protected by him. "Thank you for loving me back."